I like no race joke, but how much you want to bet that most of these deaths are gonna be white people?
This video is sponsored by War Thunder.
What nigga goes cave diving? Niggas don't do cave diving. Niggas don't even like caves.
Two sections: the historic tour, which was accessible to most visitors, and the more dangerous wild tour, reserved for experienced and daring people. After completing the easier historic tour, the guide asked if they wanted to proceed with the more challenging wild tour. Once they agreed, they were required to sign a document acknowledging the risks involved.
I mean, you know, no race joke. You know, no insult to my future Tony Hawk fans. You know, future white boys.
Now consisting of William,
But it's
James,
just
and four
niggas don't do this shit. Let's be real.
into the wild tour. He stressed the importance of staying close and reminded them of the potential dangers. As they descended into the lower sections of the cave, they encountered a 30-foot hanging cable ladder with wooden rungs. After climbing down and going a bit forward, there was a second, shorter ladder. At the bottom of the second ladder, the guide informed the group that the official tour had ended. He mentioned they could explore nearby passages if they wished, but noted that they were running behind schedule and that he needed to step away briefly for a phone call. He left the group at the base of the ladder, and this is when William decided to explore a passage he had noticed earlier. He discussed it with James, who agreed, and William attempted to climb back up the second ladder. However, the climb proved difficult. He was 6 feet tall and weighed 220 pounds. Struggling to ascend, William decided to wait for the guide instead. As time passed and the guide didn't
He just
return,
like me.
William attempted to
I
climb
just
the
only
ladder
220
again.
though.
Tragically, halfway up, he lost his grip and fell violently, striking his head on a protruding rock before landing hard on the ground. Blood began pooling from his head, and James rushed to help him. Although William remained conscious, he was delirious and visibly stunned. When the guide finally returned, he instructed the group to climb back out the way they came. However, William's condition made this impossible. James, frustrated, demanded the guide call a cave rescue team, but the guide dismissed the idea, insisting that the group work together to get William out. James began to suspect the guide was avoiding involving authorities, perhaps to prevent panic among other visitors. The group decided their best option was to bypass the second ladder entirely and take an alternative route through a narrow, previously mapped corridor, not part of the official tour. With teamwork, they managed to navigate the initial section, carrying William with them. However, the real challenge came when they reached a rough, sharp,
I know how this is gonna end.
which made gripping difficult. When it was William's turn, he went in head first, but his size made it an extremely tight fit. Halfway through, he became stuck and realized he couldn't move forward or backward. Trapped in a horizontal position with his arms pinned beneath him, he began to panic. The tightness of the passage compressed his chest, making it difficult for him to breathe. The group's
I ain't knocking nobody that likes doing this, but this is some goofy shit y'all doing. Like you want to explore some caves for? Niggas ain't Batman.
attempts to pull him out were futile. As panic set in, the guide instructed James to exit the cave and inform the owner of the situation. James rushed to the surface, but the owner appeared reluctant to involve authorities. The guide, finally recognizing the
Are they gonna get
severity
charged
of
with
the
like negligence or
situation,
some
went
shit?
out to get a med kit and to call for emergency services. It took 3 hours for rescue and medical personnel to arrive.
Oh, that nigga did.
Meanwhile, James stayed by William's side, trying to keep him calm, but William's responses grew slower and more slurred
Yeah,
until
he
he
gone.
eventually stopped responding altogether.
3
When
hours. That
rescuers
boy
reached
going.
William, they faced immense challenges. The downward angle of the passage made it difficult to revive him. They brought in heaters to protect him from hypothermia and began evacuating the rest of the group, leaving only James behind to witness what was happening to his friend. A pulley system was installed to try to free William, but every tug caused him immense pain, so much so that he once again started groaning in agony. The rescue team worked tirelessly throughout Saturday, but after 17 hours
I
of
wouldn't,
efforts, William
because I
was
wouldn't be there
tragically
in the first
pronounced
place.
dead. It took an additional 7 hours to extract his body from the cave. I wanted to take this segment to announce today's sponsor, War Thunder, which
Yeah. Sponsor. Yeah. What he said.
It was April 5th, 1999, when 21-year-old Robert Kennedy from Oklahoma set out on what was supposed to be a normal overnight camping trip near Hermit Cave. He was accompanied by 2 others, his stepbrother Richard and their mutual friend Ben. During the night, they
We kind of got
around a camp.
we got a mega cave here in the city. I might go there one day. This is mega cavern, like a gigantic cavern.
Fire and discussed the nearby cave, sharing legends and stories about its mysterious reputation. The next morning, as they were packing up to head home, their curiosity about the cave.
I got random cuts on my thumb. I have no idea where they came from. And it rhymes.
got the better of them. The cave was largely unmapped, adding an air of intrigue, so Robert proposed a quick exploration. Ben, however, had to leave early for work, so he headed back home, leaving Robert and Richard to decide for themselves. Robert and Richard entered the cave through its relatively large main entrance without much difficulty. Inside, Robert spotted one of the rumored side passages they had been talking about and decided to explore it. The narrow passage was too tight for more than one person, so Richard decided to wait outside the cave. Robert promised not to go too deep and assured Richard he'd be back soon.
Probably.
As Robert crawled forward, he encountered a section of the cave that was about 150 feet long and full of tight curves, making progress challenging. The real trouble began when he reached...
See, it's like, why would you go somewhere where I would never go somewhere that I'm unable to turn 180 degrees and go back the other way. Like, these dudes have to crawl backwards out of places. Dang, this is not for me. It's not for me.
A particular point called the Keyhole Formation. This section was especially dangerous because it was impossible to exit legs first once passed. Unaware of this, Robert continued forward. But when the passage narrowed even further, he decided it was time to...
Your curious monkey
Returning
ass.
to the Keyhole Formation, Robert realized something terrible. He couldn't pass through it feet first. His
R.I.P.
only
though,
option was to
but
move forward through
curious
the even
George
tighter
ass nigga.
crevice, hoping the cave would widen enough beyond it for him to turn around. What he didn't know was that the crevice sloped downward at a 30-degree angle. Exhausted, Robert
I think I've heard of
squeezed through the
this.
space, exhaling all the air from his lungs just to fit. After several pushes, he reached a horrifying realization. He was stuck. Gravity was working against him, and every attempt to move only worsened his situation. Desperate, Robert began yelling for help, but Richard, waiting outside the cave, couldn't hear him. Worried after some time, Richard ventured into the cave by himself, though he had no flashlight because Robert had taken the only one. Crawling in complete darkness, Richard called out for Robert, who immediately yelled back, letting him know he was trapped and struggling to breathe. Realizing he couldn't reach his stepbrother in the pitch black, Richard left the cave to call for help, and about an hour later, a team of 10 rescuers arrived and began assessing the situation. The primary problem was Robert's location. He was trapped in an extremely deep area, approximately 150
Well, they're gonna
feet
get him
from the
out.
cave.
Of course they're not gonna get him out. This is the most painful deaths. Moreover, got hope and shit for these people, and they just gonna die.
Cave's main entrance.
And they get him out.
This meant
No.
that drilling a shaft from above
Most painful
wasn't an
cave
option,
deaths of all
so the
time.
only
They ain't
way to
getting the
reach
nigga
him
out.
was through the
Talking
inside
about.
of the cave. The rescuers themselves began experiencing breathing difficulties due to the tight space, so they installed a ventilation system to pump warm air into the passages. Only one rescuer could work at a time due to the cave's tightness, and armed with manual tools, they began trying to widen the keyhole formation. However, the lack of space severely...
What does a keyhole formation even look like? Let me see. Keyhole formation. How did I pick 65? What does it look like? That's a keyhole formation? I want like an actual picture. I don't want a diagram. I don't know. This looks wide enough for him to walk through. Although it might be something different.
severely limited their maneuverability, and time
Yeah,
was
I'm not
running
going
out.
out like this. I'm
Robert's
not dying
breathing
in a
became more
cave, bro.
difficult, and he eventually stopped cooperating, making faint gurgling sounds, a sign of potential suffocation. After hours of effort, the rescuers managed to excavate through the keyhole formation
And it's too
reach
late.
Robert's feet. Though
Ain't it?
unconscious, they felt a faint pulse, which gave them enough hope to try to get him out as quickly as possible. They immediately tried to pull him free, but unfortunately, the attempt failed. A pulley system was considered, but the cave's limestone and gypsum walls were too fragile to support the tension.
Gypsum.
With no other
Funny
options,
name.
they continued
Gypsum.
digging around his body, which took an additional hour. When they
And
finally
he's
freed
dead.
Robert, they rushed him outside, where paramedics were waiting. Tragically, it was too late. After 5 hours of relentless rescue operations, Robert Kennedy was pronounced dead. Black Cave Tragedy. In April 1995, Thomas Edward Benning decided to visit Black Cave.
Apparently
in
that
Arizona.
one was like
Having
super
explored
small
the
or
cave
something.
before, he felt confident that this would
It's either
be a
that or they
relatively
just wouldn't
safe
show me
trip.
what the
He
actual
entered
one
the
looked
cave
like.
alone, equipped only with an electric miner's lamp and no...
And then niggas gonna go alone. Don't they tell you like not to? You're not even supposed to like hike alone and shit. Like, they say you're supposed to at least let somebody know that you're going hiking just in case you go missing or something. This is some white people shit. These are some white people activities. I'm not gonna lie to you.
no helmet. The first part of the cave was familiar to him, and he navigated
No
it
issue,
without
though.
any issues. However, at one point, he noticed a secret side passage that caught his attention. Drawn by curiosity, Thomas strayed from the main
Drawn by
route,
what
a
again?
secret side passage that caught his attention. Drawn by curiosity, Thomas strayed from the main route he usually
Hmm.
took and began exploring the darker, narrower passage. After venturing deeper into the unfamiliar passage for some time, Thomas decided it was time to turn back. But to his growing concern, he realized that an hour had passed and he was completely lost. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't retrace his steps to the familiar route. As panic began to set in, his situation worsened. His lamp started to flicker and eventually went out, leaving him in total darkness, miles underground. With no source of light, Thomas turned to his last resort, a
Wow.
box of matches. Striking one, he managed to create a faint glow that barely illuminated the rocks around him. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. He continued forward, using one match after another, but the matches burned out quickly, and soon he ran out entirely, leaving him once again surrounded by absolute darkness. Despite the circumstances, Thomas refused to give up.
He was
devised a
alone? How do
plan
they
to
know all
leave
this
behind
shit?
small, useless items as markers to avoid circling back to the same spots. Starving, dehydrated, and
Oh,
utterly
no.
exhausted, he pressed on until he encountered the fissure, a narrow crack in the rock barely 4 feet deep. Believing this might be his only
Let's see what the... Either that or it just might be... I ain't never heard of that animal before. I guess that's just a
chance
name.
to reconnect with the familiar route or find a larger opening, he decided to enter it feet first. As he lowered himself into the gap, his hips dropped below the narrowest point, and he suddenly realized his mistake. He was completely wedged. His hips were firmly stuck between the rock walls, rendering him immobile. Using every last ounce of his strength, Thomas tried to lift himself back up, but it was no use. He was now trapped, alone, in the dark, with no one able to hear him. Days passed, and Thomas remained in the same position, growing
Damn.
weaker with each passing moment. Back home, his wife grew
See,
increasingly
this is why you
worried
let
when he
people
failed to
know where
return.
you go.
She contacted the police, who began an extensive search of the caves in the area. Unfortunately, Thomas hadn't told anyone exactly which cave he planned to visit, leaving rescuers
See?
to search blindly.
See?
Miraculously, rescuers eventually spotted his car parked near Black Cave. A
Let
rescue
people
team
know
entered the
where you're
cave,
going.
carefully exploring all the mapped sections. They found some of Thomas's belongings, including his glasses and shirt, but they missed the secret side passage he had ventured into. Amazingly, Thomas was still alive at this point, though his condition was rapidly deteriorating. Days passed, and with no further progress, authorities
When I
Wait.
was young, I wanted to be a doctor,
Ads.
but I ended up making oatmeal. I'm Brian Tate. I'm the founder
It's like,
and CEO.
I gotta wonder, like, what's going through your head? You sitting there, you're stuck down there in the complete dark. There ain't nothing you can do, and you sitting there and just nothing, no entertainment. He had to have gone insane before he died,
Thomas
right?
was officially declared missing. Refusing to give up, his wife continued pleading with authorities to resume the search. She distributed flyers around the city and reached out to anyone who might have information, but unfortunately, she wouldn't have known about her husband for a long time. It wasn't until December 1996, over a year and a half later, that 3 other cavers exploring Black Cave stumbled upon Thomas's remains in the dark, narrow passage where he had become trapped.
Damn.
Zacaton Sinkhole Incident. On April 6, 1994, diving
Alright, let's
legend
take a look.
Shek Exley, the first person in the world to log over 100 cave dives, set out to break a new depth record. His goal was to dive through the Zacaton Sinkhole in Mexico, one of the deepest water-filled sinkholes in the world, plunging over 1,000 feet. Shek's passion for deep diving began at a young age when he and his brother would compete to see how deep they could go. Tragically, during
Pause.
one such competition,
pause.
his brother lost consciousness at around 50 feet and drowned. Despite this, Shek pursued his love for diving, becoming an expert. For context, the average diver
Brothers
is
trying to see
advised
how deep
not
they
to
can
descend
go.
deeper than 150 feet, with 300 feet considered the absolute limit for experienced divers. Accompanied by fellow diver Jim Bowden,
It's
Shek
an incestual
meticulously
pause,
prepared for the
actually.
record-breaking dive. The event drew TV reporters who wanted to witness this extraordinary feat. As the 2 divers descended into the Zacaton sinkhole, they wished each other luck. Although diving together, their dives would be independent. Exley had trained for this attempt, pushing his limits in previous dives. During one preparation dive at Bushman's Hole in
Why is
South
that water
Africa,
green?
however, something weird happened. He reached an astonishing depth of 863 feet, but experienced alarming symptoms. He began hallucinating.
Yeah, I
His
mean, he
body
hit
trembled
nearly
uncontrollably, which are
almost
classic
1,000
signs
feet.
of high-pressure nervous syndrome, or HPNS. HPNS typically manifests at depths beyond 500 feet and is believed to result from the compression of cell membranes in the central nervous system. The condition can cause confusion, tremors, and even hallucinations, making it incredibly dangerous for divers at those depths. To mitigate these risks, Shek and Bowden planned to descend slowly, carefully switching tanks as they reached new depths. For the first stretch of their dive, everything went smoothly. However, problems began to arise at around 800 feet. Bowden noticed slight trembling in his hands, an early warning sign of HPNS.
And you
At
didn't just go
900
back up?
feet, Bowden encountered another issue. His air supply was running critically low. His tank pressure had dropped to 1,080 psi, far below the expected 1,800 psi needed to ensure a safe ascent. Keep in mind that decompression, depending on how deep the divers go, can take up to hours, which meant that Bowden was now in a life or death situation. Realizing the danger, Bowden began his ascent immediately, hoping he could make it back to the surface in time. Exley, however, was in even greater trouble. At around 880 feet, his vision blurred, and his body began trembling uncontrollably. HPNS symptoms, combined with nitrogen narcosis, which is a condition
Nitrogen
akin to being
narcosis.
drunk caused by high-pressure nitrogen, began impairing his ability to think clearly. To steady himself, Exley wrapped his descent line around his arms, but his symptoms worsened, causing him to breathe more rapidly and deplete his air supply at an alarming rate. In a desperate move, he switched tanks, but at such depths, this was not ideal. Disoriented and overwhelmed by his symptoms, Exley became unable to think straight or move. Bowden, ascending cautiously, noticed Exley's descent line with unused tanks still attached. While concerned, he assumed Exley might have successfully reached the sinkhole's bottom and was making his way back up slowly. However, on the surface, the support team grew suspicious. They observed bubbles rising to the
Throw in the
surface,
towel,
but
bruh.
only from one diver, Bowden. A support diver, alarmed, wrote on an underwater slate, "Where's Shek?" She decided to descend to
Where's Shek?
250 feet to investigate. At 280 feet, she spotted something chilling. Two small white squares hanging from Exley's descent line. Upon closer inspection, she realized they were pages from Exley's diving profile, tools he had used to meticulously plan his dive. The realization was devastating. Shek was stuck somewhere deep below. Nearly 10 hours after their initial descent, Bowden miraculously surfaced, surviving his own life-threatening dive. Exley, however, a hero that had previously saved numerous other divers, remained in the depths of the Zacaton sinkhole.
Yeah, that
3
boy
days
dead.
later, the recovery team
3
pulled his
days?
descent
Yeah, that
line
boy's
to the
dead.
surface, bringing Exley's lifeless body with it. Jim Bowden reached an extraordinary depth of 915 feet during the dive, setting a world record for open-circuit scuba diving. Again, thank you to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to play
Thank you, War
guide to
Thunder.
visit a kit for
Did I just restart
experienced
the
and
video?
daring. And
If a man really hated
Hmm.
ads, here's what he would do. Day 1, he would install Pi on his computer without spending a
Wes.
dime because it's
overwhelmed by his
Oh,
symptoms.
that was the
his
last one.
support sent- They were able to serve full body response by using my links in the pinned.
Well, it was only 15 minutes. I can't swim, so I don't really go near water like